Hey MiniWarGamers, welcome to another episode of The Machine Shop. I'm Ash, and I am here today to talk to you about painted versus unpainted, primarily in the world of Warmachine. And why am I thinking about this? Well, Warmachine's interesting. It's interesting in that it is a miniature war game, right? So a company that produces widgets, little 1-inch tall toy soldiers like this guy. And their intent is to sell you these so you can play a game. Now, the reason that I want to talk about this today, the reason this popped in my head and I wanted to do a show about it, is I've been playing, once again, tons of Warmachine recently. I've been running the season 3 with Joel of the Warmachine League here at MiniWarGaming. And one of the things we did for the league is we had a painting requirement. So what that means is, in order to play in the league, your miniatures had to be painted. Now this is very rare for any kind of organized activity in Warmachine. Most Warmachine tournaments require no painting whatsoever. They have a hardcore variant to the tournament play that does require painting. But for the most part, most Warmachine players aren't required to paint their models. And what I've noticed over time is there has been a culture kind of developed around the models of, I don't want to say indifference, but of value placement. And so when I say value placement, what I mean is, what do you care about that miniature? And I think one of the things I need to do before I get to talking about the rest of this is recap where people place value. I talked in an earlier episode about an old article in White Dwarf, Games Workshop's magazine, by Jervis Johnson. It's a series called Standard Bearer, and he did an article about what he called the hobby pie. And the hobby pie is a pie chart. I talked about it before. It's all divided into sections. And as best he could figure out, the hobby of miniature wargaming is kind of divided into segments, right? There's a social aspect of actually getting together face-to-face with people playing your hobby. Miniature wargaming is a social game. You can't really do it solo. A lot of people do, but for the most part, primarily, you know, it's a social activity. You're playing against an opponent. You have a mutual contract to play a game. There's a collecting component, right? People collect toy soldiers. They've done it before there was games, right? People just have a fascination with little model figurines from a historical standpoint, and now in popular culture too. There's the evocative sort of intellectual property aspect of it, the story, right? The ethos, sort of the IP that whatever these little widgets are based on. People have that as a thing that they like. That's what they place value in. There's the game itself, which is actually putting them on a table and using the mechanics of the game, the written mechanics of the game, to try and outfox your opponent and win. And there's painting these miniatures. There's the art form of actually, not just painting, but modeling and painting. So taking the actual widget, the thing you've collected, putting it together and painting it. So I kind of wanted to recap that thing, that concept of a hobby pie. And the idea is that everybody has their own sort of pie chart of where they place value in their miniature wargaming hobby. So just because you like one aspect of it quite a bit doesn't mean that you don't also value other aspects, and vice versa. Just because you don't have any interest in an aspect of it doesn't mean that the aspect isn't valid, because other people might place value there. So I guess the next thing that we need to talk about is the culture of wargaming. So painted versus not painted, that's a cultural topic. So again, I think that's something that's worth exploring. The next thing we need to talk about is culture of wargame, and that's sort of a topic in and of itself. Every wargame, so every hobby actually, I shouldn't even say wargames, every hobby has a culture, right? There is a sort of ethos that builds up around hobbies. So for instance, one of my other hobbies is backpacking, right? I will go live like a hobo on the side of a mountain for a week if I could, and I would spend most of my life doing it if I had a choice. There's a culture and ethos around backpacking. It's kind of a carefree, sort of liberal sort of culture of people. They tend to get along perfectly well with other strangers. A lot of them tend to be very sort of individualistic, capable, solo people. They tend to place value in nature, obviously, because they've chosen to spend a bunch of time in nature, and in things like causes built around that. So like causes around the park system, or the leave no trace movement, like, you know, the take only pictures, leave only footprints. You shouldn't disturb nature when you're there. So when I say there's a culture around a hobby, wargaming in all of its different sort of packs, because I'm gonna use that term as, or tribes even, maybe is a better term. The different tribes of wargamers, all with their sort of separate interests, and who are living in their little islands of hobby, like hobbies that they like, all have their own cultures. So that's an interesting thing to explore. And there's kind of three that I'll talk about right now. There's popular culture wargamers. And when I say popular culture, what I'm talking about is wargamers interested in things that are part of popular culture: science fiction, fantasy, steampunk, horror, eldritch horror. Like, I could go on and on. There's a million different elements of popular culture. Star Trek, Star Wars, all elements of popular culture. There's historical-based wargamers. They're really interested in history. And so for them, the intellectual property part of their wargame is history. It's only really recently that historical wargaming and sort of popular culture wargaming have started to get closer together again. Companies like Battlefront and Bolt Action have brought sort of the what-if scenario kind of wargaming, which is what popular wargaming is really built around, and moved into the historical thing, where you're not trying to reenact necessarily historical events, which for a long time that's what historical wargaming was about. You're trying to play a game of what if with your army against somebody else's army. And then there's game-based miniature war games, or even not just miniature war games, but games in general, where the mechanics of the game and sort of strategy-based gaming are the most important thing. Chess is a very good example of that. I mean, there isn't an intellectual property element to chess. There's two diametrically opposed teams, and both of them are trying to play a strategy game to beat their opponent in a two-dimensional, very cleanly ruled landscape. So that's why chess has been so popular for so long and is considered probably the greatest game in history. There's arguments against that. I really like Monopoly, but no one will play with me because I won't trade. So when we talk about these kinds of tribes, right? These tribes all place value in different things, even amongst the tribe itself. So for instance, popular miniature wargaming, you have war games like Warhammer 30K. I'm going to use an example. It's not Warhammer 40,000. I'm not talking about Warhammer 30,000. Because believe it or not, that's a game now. Like, people, you can go and you hit on Google right now and you can search out games and societies and clubs and people who are almost strictly playing Warhammer 30,000. So they're using the Horus Heresy supplements from Forge World, all the Horus Heresy rules, and they are playing games set extensively in that universe. These are guys who are enamored with the intellectual property of the sort of 30K universe. They're almost like 40K historical wargamers. They're really interested in that period. You'll see tons of blogs about getting the armor just right, in doing the historical reenactments from the books, Massacre, Betrayal, all those books, and getting the details really specific and perfect. So I think they're fascinating as a group because they are almost like a subset of 40K gamers who are historical gamers, and they're really placing value in the intellectual property of the thing they're playing. Modeling as well, collecting as well. They don't really care that a Volkite Charger is better or worse than a Bolter. They care that this unit's armed with a Volkite Charger. It's a really interesting sort of a fascination that those people have. And you can compare them to, for instance, War Machine gamers. That's how this popped off in my head. War Machine gamers are very, very concerned with the mechanics of the game, primarily, and that's a cultural thing. And I've talked about this in Playing to Win, a previous episode, which you should go watch if you don't know what I'm talking about. That's okay. Like, that's okay that they like that the best. And that right there is a sort of fascination. That's a tribe of miniature wargamers. So there's another key component here. There's the business itself. So that business itself, where are they placing value in products? And how does this all come back to painted versus unpainted? Well, the business, they care about selling widgets, right? Doesn't matter what kind of business they the people inside the business, because a business isn't a person, a business is a organization whose existence it is to create revenue, right? People inside the business itself, just like tribes have different members and they all care about different things, they care about different things too. So I guarantee you that the people that write the rules for Privateer Press, they care about getting the rules right and having a great competitive game, and all the stuff that their players probably care about too, because most of them will have hired out of that tribe to do the really good job at doing this. What the business cares about is that you can leverage that aspect of the hobby pie, the playing games, to sell widgets, right? So a great example is things like tier lists. I talked about this in Playing to Win. You can use tier lists to cross-pollinate product lines. So, for instance, I'm building a Magnus, the Trader army right now in War Machine. If I use the Bad Seeds tier list, I all of a sudden have access to Long Gunners or Trenchers. So, although I was playing a mercenary army and I didn't really have a reason to buy these widgets, this section of widgets, I do have a reason to buy them if I'm playing Bad Seeds. So, from the business's point of view, the rules can be really important as a sales driver. And that's great. Now, I guess the final question when I'm talking about cultures and tribes of wargamers is one of these sort of bits of this hobby pie more valuable and more important than the other? And I think the only honest answer to that, all the experience I have with wargaming, how long I've been in wargaming, 26 years now, and 14 years in the business now, is that there isn't a right answer. There isn't at all. You can hedge your bets. A business might hedge their bets on rules. So for instance, Privateer Press, they've hedged their bets to make sales through using the lever of the game, right? So they're pulling that sales lever to generate revenue. They're running tournaments. They've got a very extensive organized play pack. Other companies do this are Wizards of the Coast. They are super interested in the way that their games get played because it is a revenue generator for them. Quarterly, or I think it's tri-yearly maybe, so it's 3 times a year. I can't remember how often a set gets released in Magic, but I do know that when a set comes out for Magic, that's a huge sales, that's a revenue generator, and that business plans around it, and the way that organized play works is another lever that they use to sell those widgets, which are the cards. So that's really important to them. But from a point of view of, let's say, Forge World, who I talked about earlier, they're using the intellectual property to make sales. Back once upon a time, Forge World did not make Space Marines, and Space Marines were the #1 selling thing ever. And I would agree that everybody wants to be a Space Marine, and everybody sees Space Marines everywhere in 40K. But they leveraged the popularity of the Horus Heresy novels to make a huge product line of Horus Heresy products that didn't exist, 7, 8 years ago. And they're doing a great job of using IP to make sales. So then I come back to this question of, is there a right or a wrong answer? And frankly, there isn't. And there's 2 ways of looking at that. There's the point of view of the person who's the customer, and there's the point of view of the person who's the business. For neither one is any one aspect of the miniature wargaming hobby the most important. They're kind of all important. And the reason for that is your opponents, so the people you're playing against, or your peers, so the people that you are also painting miniatures alongside, getting advice from, talking about the game with on internet forums or whatever, they all place value in some part of this miniature wargame, which is why companies place value in all of these miniature wargames, because all you guys are customers. And there's kind of 2 points of view here, right? So from the business point of view, they care about making sales. They're going to do something in all regards. Games Workshop's not going to stop making rules for their games. People will still have games to play. Privateer Press isn't going to stop making paint or putting up pictures of their miniatures beautifully painted, even though they don't require people to paint, because they want to inspire painters to paint those models as well. All those things generate revenue. And from a player's point of view, there's a quandary now, though, but is there a right or wrong thing? Because as individuals, we all like something more than we like something else. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, which is legitimacy and empathy. So, legitimacy and empathy, what do I mean by that? What I really mean is our wargamers themselves, people who are members of a niche tribe, a niche community, being inclusive or exclusive in their behavior and in their thinking. And what that means is, if you are unaware of your own likes or interests, right? Like I really care about the game, or even just unaware, but unaware of the meaning of that. So I really, really like playing the game, and I think that's the most important thing ever. But I see this other tribe of people over here who seem to place value on something else. How do I act towards them? Just like anybody who has a dissimilar interest or maybe an opposing viewpoint, it's really easy to get into a place where you disagree with somebody about what's most important. Now, the problem with doing that is you reduce the value of what they might see value in, and you come to loggerheads, right? You can't come to an agreement, and you can't seem to see eye to eye on stuff. And so what I'm proposing in this show, and the reason I want to talk about painted versus unpainted, is that those are two opposing camps. Those are two tribes of people. And I guarantee you there are people who play War Machine that won't play with unpainted models. I'm one of them. Just like I guarantee that there's people out there that play War Machine, probably tons of them, that have no interest in painting miniatures. They do it if they're required to, probably begrudgingly, but it's not something that fires them up and they're not excited to do it. So they don't. Now, when I talk about inclusionary and exclusionary behavior, what I'm talking about is if, for instance, there was a War Machine tournament that required people not to paint their miniatures and told people who had painted their miniatures not to come, that would be exclusionary behavior. Vice versa, if you run a tournament where you are requiring people to paint their models, or an event or an activity or whatever, requiring people to paint, that's also exclusionary behavior. If that person has no interest in painting their models. Now, do you want either of those things to happen? That's kind of where the question comes down to it, right? Like, and there's an argument on both sides. Well, okay, the people that are required to paint their miniatures, they're still able to make a choice. So if you're going to come to an event where you're required to paint your miniatures, the person who's saying that we need these miniatures to be painted for you to play here isn't saying you can't paint your miniatures. Whereas if there was some scenario, which I know doesn't exist, where a tournament said, you don't have to paint your miniatures, and if you paint your miniatures, we don't want you to come, that would be exclusionary behavior. So one is actually exclusionary in this hypothetical world where tournaments like that existed. The other one, of you don't have to paint your miniatures, or you do have to paint your miniatures, those are still fairly inclusionary, because all they're doing is they are trying to respect value placements, right, on either side of that fence. So on the guy who really values playing the game, doesn't necessarily value painting the models, they're trying to include as many of those people as possible. And the people that really value painting and want to play games against painted miniatures, they're trying to include as many of those people as possible too. So it all comes down to player choice then, and those behaviors aren't inherently exclusionary because the player then has the choice as to whether or not they want to go. There's other arguments against either of those things. There's the, well, I put a lot of hard work into mine, I don't like seeing unpainted ones across the table for me, versus I don't have a lot of free time and I don't want to really work very hard to paint these miniatures, why am I being excluded? But those are all internal, right? Those are all personal things. There's the sort of inability that we have, an emotional inability when we really like something, to differentiate our hobby, right, our miniature wargaming hobby, from the miniature wargaming hobby, right, the world out there that exists where everybody likes something different, and they all might not necessarily see eye to eye, but they tend to collect into groups of people that do. There's also, the whole play with bases argument. You could technically do that. A privateer press manufactured base is still a miniature. And I guarantee you that for some people out there, because I've seen it happen, that's okay. I've seen tons of guys play games with proxy bases, test out new units to avoid buying units in their local store. That's a legitimate thing I've seen people do. It's not wrong. It's the way those guys want to enjoy the miniature wargaming hobby. So I guess the only conclusion I can come to here, when I talk about the painted versus unpainted argument, I talk about tribes and I talk about the whole ethos of everybody likes something different, is for some people, having a painted miniature is the end-all and be-all of their hobby. And they have events where they all congregate and they do stuff to celebrate that. There's the Gen Con Crystal Brush paint, the Crystal Brush painting contest, the Gen Con painting contest, cash painting contests. Cool Mini or Not painting contest, I think it's Crystal Brush. There's Golden Demon, one of the oldest, longest running miniature painting contests on Earth. The Games Workshop holds. And think of those if you are a miniature gamer, so you're a person that likes to play in tournaments and play gaming tournaments. Those are tournaments for painters. If you can wrap your mind around that, they don't happen as often necessarily as gaming tournaments do, especially ones that don't require painting, because the only investment in time there is for you to put your models together, maybe mark the bases, and then go play. But those are all tournaments. Those are all painters pitting their painting skills against other painters. And it has just as much value as a tournament like the WTC, the World Warhammer War Machine Team Tournament that was just held in Poland this past week when I'm filming this. They're all real and they're all okay. And so that's where I'm going to come to about talking about empathy versus legitimacy. So your hobby is your legitimate hobby, right? It is the thing you like. It's the thing that's best. But his hobby, the guy next to you, the guy you don't necessarily disagree with, you don't understand, his hobby is legitimate too. And everybody tends to have more fun when people have empathy for that. And the difference between empathy and sympathy is that empathy is I understand how you feel. So I logically in my brain am able to pick up the way that you're feeling and I understand it. I don't necessarily share that feeling, but I understand it. Versus sympathy of you and I feel the same way. So I know how you feel and I feel the same way. And I think that if everybody understood that everybody's got a legitimate hobby and that there are other people in this world who are part of a different tribe and have a different hobby, and I understand how they feel about their hobby and that's okay too, then you'd get a lot less arguments about, well, this is crap or this is garbage or this is different. Technically speaking, every miniature wargaming is the same. There's rules for a game, there's miniatures that go along with it, you play it on some kind of surface. They're not unique. But the intent of the people playing them and the way that they are marketed by the people selling them creates these tribes. And the only difference between these tribes is the way that they visualize what they're doing. So I guess the plea that I have is you're all playing with toy soldiers. At the end of the day, they all go back in the box, right? And if your opponent and you had a good time doing what it is you like to do, whether it was sitting, watching a bad movie and painting miniatures for 6 hours, once, twice a week, or throwing dice and trying to outfox each other and have the best winning game you possibly can, you equally are members of the same larger tribe that is miniature wargamers. I said, I think really early in this series, that I'm polygamerist. I love miniature wargaming in general, and I think that really all toy soldiers are created equal, even the ugly ones. And they're all loved by somebody, and that's okay. Just like you, everybody has a mom, and everybody has got a mom somewhere that loves them. Every miniature's got a sculptor out there that loves sculpting it, and someone out there that thinks it's the coolest thing ever. So my hope here in the painted versus unpainted debate is to try and pull apart the underpinnings of what it's about, and talk about the fact that those are just two cogs in a otherwise bigger wheel, or a hobby pie, as I called it earlier. And I think if people just sort of self-examine and talk about to themselves, like, well, what is it I like best? They might understand the other people in other tribes that have something different that they want to talk about. Yeah, so there it is. There's my talk about painted versus unpainted. I kind of rambled on there a bit about the larger underpinnings of miniature wargaming. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to hit me in the comments. I'm much more likely to see them on the MiniWarGaming site, but I'll look at the YouTube stuff too. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Once again, if you have any ideas for a show or things you want to talk to me about or would be interested in hearing my opinions on, feel free to ask me that too. Yeah, let's see what's on the painting table. So in the time since I filmed the last of my Machine Shop episodes, I think episode 2, the War Machine League Season 3 is actually wrapped up. I've been pretty busy painting since then. I finished painting my Nomad. He is actually the old original metal Nomad. And the first thing I was really shocked about is how big this guy is. He is like probably 10 or 20% bigger than the plastic Nomad, which I think is awesome because I love this miniature. I put mine swinging his sword. He has a big, huge, giant killamajig. And of course, I did my usual flamey fire bits and all of the sort of recesses to look like he's on fire on the inside. I'm pretty happy with him. It's a meat and potatoes paint job, but for 6 points, I wasn't going to do a whole lot of time working on him. And there he is finished. And then I also painted my Alexia and her Risen. So Alexia Kyanor, I think I pronounced it right. And her Risen. So there she is. I kind of did her in a witchy, warlocky, white hair kind of scheme. And I have a theory about Alexia and the Risen. This is from the background point of view. In that I really don't understand how when someone dies in War Machine, a living model, she gains a corpse token, but immediately all those corpses have all their skin fall off, turn to skeletons, and are all dressed like one of 3 different factions. So the way I painted mine was like ghosts. First thing I said to myself when I unpacked my, I think, 11 Risen that she came with, because I have the old box, was, I'm going to paint these like Army of the Dead from Lord of the Rings, who are all looking like the Frighteners from the movie The Frighteners, which is also a Peter Jackson movie, if you didn't know that. So all mine are in a ghostly, sort of glowy look. My whole idea is more like she's collecting the soul-y energy of whatever's around her and then animating a bunch of stuff that comes out of the ground. So more of an ancient stuff rising from the grave, powered by the corpses around her than anything else. I also painted a Thrall. Again, he's wearing kind of a corporeal antique suit of armor, and then the rest of him is all glowy, spirity, bedknobs and broomsticks. For those of you who are old like me, you'll get that reference. Sort of bits and pieces. So that's my Alexia Cena and the Risen. I got to play a game against them, or with them against Nick Hodges in the league, and I'm super happy with him so far. I think Bubba and I actually, another guy who played in the league, are going to split a box just to get the rest of our Risen. He's got the same problem I do. He has 11 Risen and Alexia, which is how it used to come. The box came like that because the Risen came in blisters of 3. So even though it's Alexia and 9 Risen, you'd get 11 Risen so that you only had to buy 3 blisters to make the unit 20. It was the weirdest packing of merchandise thing ever. It still hurts my brain. But I will probably split a box with them that way. We can both have 20-man units at some point. And I'll maybe use the extra Elixir for something else. We haven't decided yet. So something new I'm going to do too on the painting tables, I'm going to talk to you about my half-painted miniatures. So I've been loving my Mangler. For you guys who've been keeping up with the War Machine League Season 3 when I started playing my Mercenaries, I really enjoyed the Mangler. He's an awesome old Mike McVeigh sculpt, believe it or not. Mike McVeigh sculpted this miniature. And I have 2 of them because I had 2 Magnus Battle Boxes. That's how I got my second Renegade as well. So I got another one. He's base coated. And he's going to get finished probably in the next couple weeks because I want to use the Magnus Tier 4 list with double Mangler. So one can be Iron Aggression and one can be Temperamental from the very beginning of the game because you get to have them start with continuous effects, which is pretty awesome. And then Orin Midwinter, who's also part of that same Most Wanted thing. I got him base coated as well. He's the Rogue Inquisitor. He's got some cool abilities. There's very few solos available in that tier list, so I'm kind of excited about him. I got my order from Miniature Market with the rest of my Mercenary Souls that I hadn't purchased when I quit playing War Machine for that 4-year stint because I was living somewhere where everything wasn't. And then, so that's my half-painted or base-coated bit of on the painting table. And then I've also got 2 guys that I've just basically based and gotten primed, like they're ready to start being painted, but they're not actually painted. And that's the Ragman and good old Dougal McNeil. The reason these guys are so important is I also have a Galleon, but it's still sitting in a box because he takes a little bit longer to assemble. I'm going to magnetize him some pieces so that, one, I can pull him off the base and use just the base because he's a huge miniature and sometimes stuff just gets in the way and it's more convenient to use the base with the markings on it. And also so that his arms can pop off so that I can transport him a little bit easier. So I'm going to magnetize his big arms, I'm going to magnetize his feet on the base, and that's a little more time intensive. And I just got all this stuff last weekend, so... yeah, that's why I need to wait a little bit to get him done. But those 2 guys are going on that list because Ragman and Dougal can sit nicely behind my Galleon and give the -2 armor buff from the Ragman with a huge 2-inch reach bubble on the Galleon. which he can drag guys into too with his harpoon, which is pretty awesome. And then Dougal's just an obvious include because he can mini feat and give the guy +2 range, plus artillerist lets him reroll all of his range attacks for the most part, except for the harpoon because they're all blast. So it's pretty awesome. So there you go. From a painty guy like me, I'm painting things because of the game. So you can see I have a fairly well-rounded overall hobby pie. So yeah, there it is. If you want to talk about something I've painted or ask me what else I'm working on, feel free to do so in the comments. And that's it. It's on the painting table with me. I hope you guys enjoyed episode 3 and my ramblings about painting versus unpainted and the machine shop. And we'll see you next time. Until then, happy wargaming.